Well, the next item of business this afternoon is a members' business debate on motion number S4M 05594 in the name of Neil Findlay on blacklisting a Scottish and UK human rights abuse. This debate will be concluded without any questions being put, and I would invite members who wish to speak in the debate to please press the request to speak buttons now or as soon as possible. Call on Mr Findlay to open the debate. 7 minutes, please, or thereby.
Thanks very much, Presiding Officer. And can I first of all declare an interest as a member of Unite the Union and a past member of UCAT. In the 1980s and 90s, I worked in the building trade as a bricklayer, and across the industry, rumour and speculation about blacklisting was rife, but hard evidence difficult to find. But following raids by the Information Commissioner in England on the Consulting Association, which in effect is the successor organisation to the infamous and sinister Economic League, we now have evidence beyond any doubt that the biggest construction companies in Scotland and throughout the UK were involved in financing, supporting and using in a systematic way a centrally held secret list which was used by companies to, first of all, check whether prospective employees were deemed suitable to employ, and secondly, to provide their own details to the Consulting Association of employees they deemed as unsuitable for further employment in the construction industry. At this point, I want to pay tribute to the Blacklist Support Group and to Ian Davidson MP and the Scottish Affairs Select Committee at Westminster for exposing this scandal. Their report showed how, as a result of these practices, workers were denied employment without explanation, financial hardship was caused and lives disrupted and sometimes ruined. There was no right of appeal or challenge to the information held on the list or the decisions made, and those affected, though they may have had their suspicions, had no evidence that they were being discriminated against in such a systematic and methodical way. Liberty, the Human Rights Group, has called this a major human rights abuse, and I think they are absolutely correct. The Scottish Affairs Committee report highlights how people were blacklisted for the heinous crime of looking out for their fellow workers, for raising issues of health and safety, for exposing dangerous site practices which could have and did injure, kill and maim their workmates. They were blacklisted for raising concerns about site welfare, for refusing to accept no toilet or washing facilities, for speaking up about wage rates and raising trade union issues. And shop stewards and health and safety reps were at the top of the list when it came to the Consulting Association, but so were environmental campaigners and political activists or even people related to them. Listen to some of the extracts from these recovered entries from the blacklist records, and these are direct quotes. Mr A was involved in a dispute to try and enforce the main contractor to take responsibility for the non-payment of several weeks' wages. So someone was blacklisted for the crime of wanting to be paid for the work that they did. Or Mr B, while at the site X, he drew health and safety issues to the attention of the site manager, blacklisted for keeping a workplace safe. Or of Mr C, it was said it is thought possible he is the twin of another employee, blacklisted for being someone's brother. And there are many, many other examples that say shop steward, communist, militant, sells a socialist worker, attended union meeting, attended meeting at a Labour club, or environmental activist. All these given as the reason for being listed. This shows the extent of victimisation of these workers. It is McCarthyism writ large. Across the UK, over 3,000 workers were on the list, around 400 in Scotland. And it was some of our biggest names who were involved, companies that have repeatedly received huge amounts of public money from contracts awarded in Scotland. Companies like AMEC, AME Infrastructure Services, AME Roads Limited, Bailey Maintenance, Balfour Beatty Construction Limited, Balfour Beatty Civil Engineering, BAM Nuttall Limited, Carillion Construction, Langer Rock, Morrison Construction, Skanska Construction, Sir Robert McAlpine Limited, the Blacklister-in-Chief, Norwest Holks Limited, and, scandalously, the Forth Crossing Bridge Constructors Joint Venture. All of these companies winning contracts here in Scotland and using the Consulting Association's blacklist. Presiding Officer, I worry that if we're looking for a new name for the Forth Crossing, then if we don't watch out, it will be known as the Blacklisters Crossing. Presiding Officer, this Parliament should make it clear that we expect these companies, first of all, to own up to the extent of their activities, to release all information they hold on individuals, to apologise and to pay compensation to those affected, and that the individuals involved are held to account for their actions. And through the procurement bill going through this Parliament soon, we should commit to putting in place guidance to ensure that this never happens again. And if companies don't comply, then those named in the Consultant Association list should be barred from every public sector tendering list. I think we need to take a very hard line on this. Now, I know the Cabinet Secretary has committed to working with trade unions and others in this Parliament to look at how we deal with these issues, and I look forward to engaging in those discussions. But if there is no solution, then I have to make it clear that I would intend moving amendments to the bill when it comes forward. Because according to Unite, the GMB and UCAT, this scandal has not ended. On the Crossrail project in London, shop stewards and union activists are still being sacked. We cannot allow this to happen, especially in one of the biggest construction projects in Scotland, namely the Forth Crossing. And I would ask the Minister, when she's summing up, how are we making sure that the companies operating on that contract are not blacklisting as we speak? Presiding Officer, I want to pay tribute to the real heroes of this story, and they're not politicians, they're not trade union leaders, but they are ordinary electricians, joiners, bricklayers, steel erectors, scaffolders and the rest, who, in upholding health and safety standards and the principles and values of good trade unionism, of looking out for their fellow workers, were victimised and had their livelihoods taken from them, and whose families suffered greatly as a result. People like Dave Smith, Steve Atchison, Francie Graham, Stuart Merchant, only a few names amongst thousands who refused to be beaten. I hope that because of their actions and the actions of their unions, the construction industry of the future will be better than the industry of the past. And finally, Presiding Officer, we need here a Scottish-focused inquiry into these activities. Only that way will we expose the true extent of this appalling scandal and how it has affected so many of our fellow Scots. I would also ask the Minister, in her summing up, whether she would support my call for a Scottish inquiry into blacklisting.
Thank you very much. I now call on Anne McTaggart to be followed by Christina McKelvey. 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I am once again delighted to take part in this debate on the subject of blacklisting of Scottish construction workers. And I thank my colleague Neil Findlay not only for securing this time on the Chamber to discuss the disgraceful practices of some of the best known names in the construction industry, but also for his tireless campaigning to achieve justice for those that had been left unemployable as a result of their trade union activities. The blacklisting of construction workers by private companies meant that hundreds of workers were denied the chance to make a living and provide for their families. These 582 workers were profoundly disadvantaged, not because they were underperforming in their jobs or failing to meet the industry standards expected of them. Their employment was terminated due to their membership of a trade union for holding political views not shared by their employers, or for raising real concern about health and safety practices. They were illegally penalised for this in a manner that reflects neither the society we live in nor the way we believe business should be concluded in Scotland. These revelations are shocking. My shock at the blacklisting of innocent and hard-working employees is compounded further upon learning that known blacklisting practitioners are profiting directly from public contracts. It does our workers and our people a discredit to allow those who have broken the law to profiteer through building our schools, our health facilities and our transport links. However, whilst we cannot undo the human rights abuses that have been committed, we do not have an opportunity to ensure we do have the opportunity to ensure that they were never repeated, nor are they rewarded. I support my colleagues in asking the Scottish Government to review their procurement processes and reconsider the involvement of companies in the building of the Forth replacement crossing. Who have been the major participants in this blacklisting scandal? This is a significant, high-profile project, and we should be using it to showcase the best of our Scottish industry, not to support the businesses and the lawbreakers with profits from taxpayers. I also urge the Scottish Government to act upon the recommendations from members across this chamber that anti-blacklisting measures are included in the upcoming procurement reform bill. In legislating against the tendering for future contracts by blacklisting companies, we assure Scots that they live in a society that values and supports working people. We have a duty to set a strong, unambiguous example to employers in all sectors and to go some way to rectifying the scandalous practices that have blighted individuals, families and communities across Scotland for too long. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now call on Christina McKelvey to be followed by Drew Smith.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. Can I take this opportunity in this debate to commend the campaign by Unite and put on record my personal thanks to both Stuart Hume and Greg MacArthur, who on a daily basis have given me updates on this campaign and the challenges that they are facing. Deputy Presiding Officer, the practice of blacklisting workers especially, but by no means only in the construction sector, is reprehensible, and I am sure that everyone in this chamber is agreed on that. The House of Commons report referred to earlier, Blacklisting and Employment Interim Report, makes it abundantly clear that there is no occasional word in the ear event. It is, as Mr Finlay's motion stresses, a real live conspiracy. Presiding Officer, our procurement procedures in government need to take into account the danger of blacklisted companies somehow slipping through the net. The upcoming procurement reform bill should include a specific clause to ensure that no company found guilty of blacklisting can be eligible to tender for any government contract. That's why I was reassured when, on the 27th of March this year, Deputy First Minister Nicola Sturgeon said, and I quote, "We are totally opposed to blacklisting or the compiling of a blacklist and are developing guidance for public bodies on addressing the issue in future procurement processes and public contracts." She continued, "We are also considering what measures we can include in the forthcoming procurement reform bill to deal with inappropriate conduct such as blacklisting by companies bidding for public contracts in Scotland." She also added at a later date, on the 17th of April, "Last but not least, and this was in debate, we also need to expect companies that bid for public contracts to demonstrate high standards of ethical conduct or know that they risk being excluded from the market. The practice of blacklisting, failure to comply with tax obligations and other acts of professional misconduct may and should in future result in a company being judged as unsuitable in a bid. The Government regards blacklisting as wholly unacceptable, and my officials have invited trade union representatives, including the Scottish Trade Union Congress, to work with us to develop guidelines for purchasers and how to address the issue when awarding contracts. I think very welcome words indeed, and I would urge my friends in the trade union movement to take up that offer. I've got 4 minutes.
I'm very pleased that she supports changes to the procurement process. I wonder, given that Christine McKelvey has said that this is a live conspiracy, whether she supports my call for an independent inquiry in Scotland into blacklisting.
Christina McKelvey.
I don't think that's an unreasonable request, but I think now that we've got the interim report from the Scottish Affairs Committee, we should await the final report and discuss it then, but certainly happy to keep my mind open on that one. Presiding Officer, it is important to stress just how good our record is in public procurement, since small and medium enterprises form the backbone of business here. And it's absolutely right that 82% of contracts advertised in public contracts Scotland are won by small and medium-sized businesses. At Westminster, that figure is just 14%. Most of those businesses involved in the despicable practice of blacklisting are big companies, as we've heard, either oil and gas or construction. The Scottish Government, as we heard, is totally opposed to blacklisting. Part of the problem is, of course, the systematic secrecy around blacklisting. Companies subscribing to the Consultant Organisation Association don't broadcast the information they compile. And the report actually makes clear the emphasis throughout was in secrecy, with telephone access to sensitive information restricted to only a few, with lists of names submitted and destroyed at the end of each working day, and no acknowledgement that any such system exists. And we note that many of the entries in the blacklisting files, as Neil Findlay has explained, was more about gossip and people were blacklisted en masse. The authors say that they believe that most of the companies involved are genuine in their regret at having been caught. I have no doubt that in that phraseology they were sorry to be caught, but that's not to say they're sorry for ruined lives, homes and families as a direct result of their malpractices. The STUC passed a motion recently at the Congress that welcomed the exposure of the pernicious illegal practice of blacklisting, and I support that. Blacklisting companies should be looking over their shoulders all the time. The Government does not want to give contracts to offending current companies. Transparency and openness is the key word here. We may never discover the extent of this abhorrent practice or the number of people damaged, but, Presiding Officer, let us ensure that we send a clear message today to those companies who engage in it. We don't want your tenders, you won't get our contracts, and we will seek to prosecute if you are caught.
Thank you very much. I now call on Drew Smith to be followed by Alex Johnson. Up to 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, President Officer. I'm grateful to be called in this debate, and I congratulate Neil Findlay not only for securing it, but for the campaigning that he has done on this issue, and I draw you and other members' attention to my entry in the Register of Interest. Like other members, I also want to thank the Scottish Affairs Committee for the work they have done, and particularly the Chair, Ian Davidson, and Pamela Nash, who both came here recently to provide us with a very useful and, along the time, was quite right to say, shocking briefing, which was coordinated by Neil Findlay and included representatives of those affected, UCAT, Unite and the GMB. Blacklisting has cost men and women their livelihoods. It has destroyed lives, and those companies responsible are forever tainted by their involvement and must be held accountable. This time last week, we marked International Workers' Memorial Day in this chamber, and many members made the connection between the fight for decent health and safety regulation in this country and the utterly unnecessary sacrifice of human life for greed and profit which has taken place in Bangladesh. Here, health and safety is under attack as never before. Vital regulation is being ripped up and workers are being put at risk by cuts to inspections and a failure to enforce or prosecute. Indeed, the Tory government seems to be picking up where it left off in 1997. The focus has moved, or rather been widened, from trying to break workplace organisation and the labour movement through assaults on collective rights to a new assault on individual employment rights. Workers are encouraged to swap rights for shares, and the employment tribunal system, which is after all a last resort, is being closed off to, with a worker who has been unfairly dismissed now having to pay to have their complaint heard. It is claimed that blacklisting is a historic practice, and indeed what has been uncovered is a conspiracy which has gone on for decades. But members should be in no doubt. Allegations have been made about blacklisting during recent construction projects, including the Olympics and London Crossrail. These same firms are currently benefiting from Scottish public sector contracts and are employing my constituents to work in them today. Blacklisting, by its very nature, is a clandestine activity, and its victims are unlikely to know that they are victims. The most recent concerns which Unite the Union have raised concern Crossrail contracts, or rather the loss of a contract where it is alleged that 28 workers were made redundant because of an attempt by union members to raise health and safety concerns. That allegation relates to circumstances in September 2012. Before I close, Presiding Officer, I want to ask members to imagine what it would be like to be a construction worker who raises concerns about cutting corners on the site or an issue about the safety of a scaffold or a piece of equipment. What is your motivation to speak out? And now think about what the motivation is of the employer who notes down your name and shares their file to ensure that you never work again. You don't know that you're on that list. You might suspect, you might tell others. You're probably dismissed as a conspiracy theorist. Perhaps your partner blames you for not being able to find work or keep a job. Your kids wonder why their friends' dads are in work, but you're unable to provide for them. Blacklisting victims are a victim of an imbalance which exists in the workplace between the employer and the employee. There are good employers and there are bad employers, but this imbalance exists everywhere, and collective organisation by the weaker party, by working people both at work and politically, remains the only way to ensure any tilt towards a world of work for our children which is better than the one we inherited from our own parents and grandparents. People who organise in trade unions, people who speak out because something is unsafe, people who agitate for the fair remuneration of their labour. These people shouldn't be blacklisted, Presiding Officer, they should be celebrated. So let this Parliament celebrate them by getting on and doing something for them. If the UK Government won't have a public inquiry, let us set it up. Let's demand compensation for victims. Let's examine the contractors who are delivering our public works now. Let's use procurement to ensure that the corporations responsible are hurt in the only place that they will notice, Presiding Officer, on their balance sheets.
Thank you very much. And before I call the next speaker, due to the number of members still wishing to speak in the debate, I am minded to accept a motion under Rule 8.14.3 that the debate be extended by up to 30 minutes. Mr Finlay, would you like to move this motion?
Move the motion.
Thank you. The question is that under Rule 8.14.3 that the debate be extended by up to 30 minutes. Are we agreed? We are. Thank you. I now call on Mr Johnson to be followed by Richard Baker.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. I welcome the fact that Neil Finlay has been able to bring this matter before the Chamber today, not least because it gives me an opportunity to speak from the Conservative benches about the issues which his motion raises. The practice of so-called blacklisting is a scandal. It is a shameful chapter in our industrial relations history, and one which we should work very hard to ensure does not continue. It's bad enough that the legitimate trade union activity pursued by some has been used as an excuse for some very shoddy treatment, but worse still to hear that health and safety regulations and attempts to improve health and safety have been used as another reason for attacking individual workers. There has been a suggestion that the procurement bill, which is passing through this Parliament, or will be in the near future, can be used to ensure that public money is not used to support this type of practice in Scotland's industrial environment. And I see that as a worthwhile pursuit. And certainly, if I am still on that committee and am participating in it, I will ensure that wherever possible, I support such measures. But the priority for us all must be to ensure that this practice has ended and that it does not return in any other guise. For that reason, I am keen to emphasise that if any inquiry does take place, that it must have as one of its key principles reconciliation. The list of companies which are contained in the motion are companies which have a key role in producing growth within our economy in the longer term, and it is vital that as we get through this process, we do not impede the opportunities for growth that they can deliver.
Neil Finlay.
I think it hits the nail on the head, to use a construction phrase. That this lot have to get their act together and get their house in order. But when he mentions an inquiry, can I now take it that the Scottish Conservative Party support an independent inquiry in Scotland? Because that would be very, very welcome.
Alex Johnson.
I am not in a position to give that commitment at the moment. I retain an open mind on the suggestion and look forward to hearing contributions that take place during this debate. My key emphasis, and one of the key things that I will take into account when considering that in future, is the nature and the purpose of any such inquiry, because, as I said, reconciliation must lie at the heart of this process, because these many companies that were listed in the motion do have a key role in the future, and it is important that when we achieve the objective of ending the practice of blacklisting in Scotland once and for all, that we can then draw that metaphorical line in the sand and get on with the business of providing economic growth, providing jobs for Scotland's workforce and providing a more economically stable future for all the people of Scotland. For that reason, I want to see this process brought to a legitimate end. I want to see our priorities properly dealt with, and I want to see this episode consigned to the history books.
Thank you very much. Now call on Richard Baker to be followed by Stuart Stevenson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Like the other speakers this afternoon, can I congratulate Neil Finlay in securing this debate today and for all the work he is doing to ensure this Parliament takes meaningful action so that there can be no opportunity for the operation of blacklisting in the future and that there are penalties for those who have been engaged in this practice in the past. There is no doubt that blacklisting has ruined lives and careers and cost families across Scotland dear. We know now from the excellent work carried out by the Scottish Affairs Select Committee in Westminster that this pernicious and destructive practice was in operation for too long in our construction industry, may indeed, as we've heard, be in operation even today. I know of those in the oil and gas sector, oil and gas workers in Aberdeen, that in the 80s they were blacklisted in that industry as well. So unfortunately, this has been a dreadful practice which has been all too widespread. Certainly workers in my region, the North East, were blacklisted. Indeed, we've been made aware of some 50 such cases. Presiding Officer, I'm pleased that we're joined in the chamber today by Tommy Campbell, Unite regional organiser based in Aberdeen, who's joined by other Unite members who are campaigning on this issue. And Tommy's played a leading role in this campaign in the North East as someone who experienced the trauma of being blacklisted himself. And it's right to congratulate my own union, Unite, as well as GMB and UCAT, who have been campaigning for action at the UK and Scottish Government level to tackle effectively the issue of blacklisting. And I hope we can move forward together as a Parliament to deal with this practice. I believe we do need an inquiry, not just to understand the extent of the practice in the past, but to be reassured that there isn't widespread practice at the moment. But indeed, as we've heard in this debate, the fear of the unions is that it's going on today, and that needs to be investigated. And that's why I wrote to the First Minister in December requesting an inquiry. I hope we get a more positive response to that suggestion today. And indeed, I think members on all sides in this debate this afternoon have seen merit in an inquiry. So I hope very much it's a proposition that the Minister will take very seriously, and I want to hear more from her about that in the summing up. I also hope the Scottish Government will take the action it can take to prevent blacklisting in the future by ensuring that in the procurement reform bill there are provisions so that no company engaged in blacklisting can win public sector contracts. Now, unlike Christina McKelvey, I'm not entirely supportive of everything the Scottish Government has done in procurement, but I'm very pleased indeed to hear from her today that there is going to be a commitment from the SNP benches, and I hope also therefore from the Scottish Government that those provisions will be there in that bill. And we will welcome that absolutely on this side of the chamber as we've been campaigning it for some time. I'm very pleased we appear to be making progress on that issue and look forward to seeing those provisions there in black and white when that bill is published. Because we believe strongly the Scottish Government should use all its spending power so that companies know they simply can't afford on any level to be involved in practices like blacklisting, and so that they instead promote a culture of health and safety at work. Last weekend, many of us will have commemorated International Workers' Memorial Day. I joined the Trades Council in Aberdeen at such an event, and there we remembered those who have lost their lives at work because that culture of safety was simply not there. That's why we must ensure all workers can be confident that when they raise concerns of health and safety, when they speak up for their union members, they are listened to, their input is valued, and they don't have to live in fear of ending up on a blacklist and having their lives and careers ruined as a result. We're told this is a thing of the past. We unfortunately suspect it may well not be. We're told it doesn't happen anymore, but if that is the case, then nobody should have anything to fear from an inquiry. Everyone should be welcoming this proposal, and no one should have any problems with the measures the unions are campaigning for and which Neil Findlay has brought forward today. And can I congratulate him again on giving us the opportunity today to debate the action that we must take to ensure blacklisting truly is a thing of the past.
Thanks so much. Now calling Stuart Stevenson to be followed by Neil Bibby. Up to 4 minutes, please.
Let me, along with others, congratulate Mr Findlay on securing time for this debate, and let me congratulate him too on the powerful illustrations of abuse that he has brought to us, as other members who have participated in the debate has. Richard Baker correctly pointed to what has happened in the oil industry as well. Indeed, the abuses that there were in that industry led to the formation of a new union, led by Jake Malloy, that is now incorporated elsewhere. So it isn't simply construction. This is an abuse which has travelled beyond a single industry and may exist in industries where we as yet know little of it. It's worth just making a couple of points about how this sort of thing can happen. We are in a constitutional situation quite different, for example, from that which prevails in the United States. Amendment 6 to the US Constitution, which talks about a trial, says that people shall be entitled to a speedy and public trial by an impartial jury, to be informed of the nature and cause of the accusation, to be confronted with witnesses against them, the compulsory processes for obtaining witnesses in favour, and to have the assistance of counsel for his or her defence. Clearly, in this environment which we are talking about today, none of that prevails. We've had UK companies abrogating to themselves the right to accusation, trial, conviction and sentence of individuals, privately constituted courts meeting in secret, denying all knowledge of the sentence to the accused, preventing access to a proper defence, lacking any oversight or accountability to public policy. It is, of course, illegal to deprive someone of their liberty without due process of law. It's illegal to deprive someone of their property without due process of law, but it's not clear that it's been illegal to deprive people of the right to employment without due process of law. John Wilson.
John Wilson.
Thank Mr Stevenson for giving way, but would Mr Stevenson accept that many of the allegations that were made against these individuals and placed on a blacklist were made by other individuals, and the blacklist was kept by individuals? It was not a trial by jury, it was actually just a trial by hearsay.
Stuart Stevenson.
John Wilson helpfully makes the whole point for me, that if there is to be an accusation made, a sanction laid, that has to be done in an open and transparent way that duly causes people to end up in a position where they are penalised. Virtually none, probably none, of the people who have been operated on blacklists fall into that category, and John Wilson is absolutely correct. The whole point is that every worker should be a safety officer. It's disgraceful that we've seen people placed on blacklists for trying to make their workplaces safer, for trying, in fact, the Conservatives should recognise, to promote the interests of their employers as well as of workers. So I think it is something that we should take extreme notice of. I'm coming to the end of my short contribution, Presiding Officer. I very much welcome the indications from ministers that this will be addressed in forthcoming legislation. I do point out, of course, that we're restricted in the powers that we have. In particular, we do not have the powers to control business organisations such as operated these. I hope that the Government can find a way to make sure this never, ever happens again in Scotland.
Many thanks. I now call on Neil Bibby to be followed by John Wilson. Up to 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I refer to my register of interests. I welcome this debate, and I would like to join others in thanking my colleague Neil Findlay for bringing it forward today. A lot has already been said this afternoon about the issue of blacklisting, and there has been a significant amount of media coverage of it too. As members will know, I recently spoke in the Scottish Government's procurement debate 2 weeks ago about the issue of blacklisting. During that debate, I congratulated Unite the GMB, UCAT and their members for being at the forefront of the campaign to expose this shameful practice. And I would like to reiterate that today. Without their campaigning, I doubt we would be discussing it here or at the House of Commons, where the Scottish Affairs Select Committee has done tremendous work to expose blacklisting. I have met with union members inside and outside this Parliament on at least 4 occasions now to discuss blacklisting. Each time the message has been loud and the message has been clear. The trade unions and their members want us to do more than just simply talk about how bad blacklisting is and condemn this practice by words alone, but by using the powers we have available to eliminate this illegal and immoral practice of blacklisting. We know that at least 582 people in Scotland have been blacklisted. This is an issue that affects people in every part of Scotland. The map provided by the GMB union shows in my own region 7 people in Paisley, 19 people in Irvine, 16 people in Greenock, 10 people in Port Glasgow, 10 people in Saltcoats, 11 people in Stevenson, 15 people in Ardrisson, People in Johnston, Erskine, Renfrew, Largs, Kilwinning, Bishopbriggs, Clydebank, Helensburgh, Balloch and Dumbarton. The list goes on and on. I've just read out a list of numbers, but of course we know these are people we are talking about, not statistics. People who were denied the right to work just because they joined a trade union. People who were denied the right to work just because they raised concerns about health and safety. People whose lives were devastated. People, Presiding Officer, who deserve action. People who deserve a full and independent Scottish inquiry. People who deserve compensation. And people who deserve action from the Scottish Government on procurement. And that is why my Labour colleagues and I would propose that we exclude organisations, companies and individuals who have been found guilty of grave misconduct such as blacklisting in the course of their business activities to be excluded from providing public service contracts. Regrettably, as members have said, the Scottish Government and UK Government have issued contracts to companies involved in blacklisting. I know the Deputy First Minister and other Government members have said they are keen to engage with the trade unions and do that on a cross-party basis, and I welcome this and hope this will progress matters. As the Unite briefing for this debate today states, if there is the political will to act, then action can be taken and action must be taken. And I would advise the Minister and the Government again that if the Government does not take action through procurement, then Labour will, and I will fully support my colleague Neil Findlay if he lodges amendments to the procurement bill to stop public contracts for blacklisters. This debate has put our views on record and put the cards on the table. From the contributions we have heard, it is clear there is the political will to act. It is now time to act and for the Government to deliver on its commitments.
Thank you very much. I now call on John Wilson to be followed by Elaine Smith.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. And I open by declaring my interest, the Register of Interest declaration, that I am a member of Unite and have been a member of the Trade Union Movement for almost 40 years. As other speakers have already stated, I would like to congratulate Neil Findlay on securing this important debate on the abuse of people's basic human rights, the right to work or employment, and commend the work of the Scottish Affairs Select Committee at Westminster for their work on this issue. And particular thanks to Ian Davidson MP, and this is a unique event, thanking Ian Davidson, as the political differences mean that I can't do it very often. But I think the work that Ian Davidson has put into this campaign in Westminster clearly highlights the issues of importance. I know that many members in this chamber recognise that employment rights and protection of those rights must be defended and enhanced. The evidence provided to the Scottish Affairs Select Committee in the House of Commons has clearly identified that people were blacklisted for expressing the most basic concerns about health and safety in their workplace. I found the evidence provided in a report for the Trade Union UCAT by Professor Keith Ewing is quite compelling, and the title "Ruined Lives" really does say it all. Situations where gossip somehow becomes fact and can only lead to discriminatory practices. Neil Findlay, in his motion, quite rightly highlights the construction sector and some of the bad practices. It must be remembered that many people still do not know if they have been a victim of blacklisting, and many other industries carried out blacklisting. The recent example that we've seen in the ICO's action against the consulting agency, or the association, clearly was just the tip of the iceberg and followed almost 90 years of practice, including the work carried out by the Economic League since 1919 to actually highlight and discriminate against workers. Not only workers in terms of when they're in work, but basically meaning that people who were applying for work could not apply for jobs or were being advised, as is the case that I've heard, where they were told not to bother applying in that industry because they wouldn't get a job there because they were blacklisted. The difficulty is that many of the evidence that we're now seeing was not available to many workers. And I met many trade unionists over many years who have indicated that they were blacklisted but couldn't prove they were blacklisted. All they were told is when they applied for a job, you weren't suitable or there wasn't a job available, despite the fact they knew they were well qualified, they could do the jobs, but they were being denied the opportunity even for basic applying for the job. So clearly there has been a practice in existence for a number of years where employers have been able to pick and choose based, as I said to my colleague Mr Stevenson, on hearsay, or because they were involved in a political campaign, and as others have said, an environmental campaign. So clearly the practice that has went on has been one where we must all condemn and we must move forward. And that means highlighting the companies who engaged in the process because of the evidence we now have. But the difficulty is we do not have the evidence from the work carried out by the Economic League and the blacklisting that has taken place over the period the Economic League was in existence. I support the Government's stance on this issue, and in terms of the procurement bill, including something in that bill to ensure that we actually tell employers we will not condone the actions of this nature, and we will take whatever action we can to actually stop this practice. And really,
you must draw to a close, please.
In terms of closing, Presiding Officer, it's quite clear that this practice has existed too long. Workers who are denied their basic rights of employment must be compensated by those employers, and we have to look at all the contracts in the public sector, not just in the Scottish Government, but many local authorities who have entered into contracts with these very same companies must look closely at these contracts and bring them to an end as soon as possible.
Thanks so much. Now calling Elaine Smith, to be followed by John Finney.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I've got a registered interest as a member of Unite. I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak in this important debate, which comes at a particularly opposite time, just after International Workers' Memorial Day and as we celebrate May Day. And I commend Neil Findlay for his hard work to ensure that the odious practice of blacklisting is fully exposed and stopped in Scotland. In 2009, concrete proof was finally found that the construction industry was rife with blacklisting. But blacklisting first caught the headlines when the activities of the shady Economic League were unearthed in the early 90s, as commented on by John Wilson. Tony Blair was then the Shadow Secretary of State, and he proposed a law at that time to ban blacklisting. However, the then Tory Home Secretary, Michael Howard, opposed the ban, stating that he saw, quote, no reason to make the activities of these organisations illegal. Well, I'm pleased that all members contributing to this debate have outlined exactly why this disgraceful practice should be illegal. Workers are on blacklists simply for being members of trade unions, fighting for better pay and conditions, or raising health and safety issues that save lives. And no worker should be punished for speaking out for their rights and the rights of their workmates to enjoy decent working conditions, fair pay and acceptable standards of health and safety. And it's not only the thousands of workers who have been stopped from gaining employment who suffer from blacklisting, but also the many killed and injured at work because the people who were speaking out against the unsafe practices were silenced. And what for? So that the multi-millionaire owners of big construction firms can milk even more profit out of their operations, often at the expense of health and safety. Presiding Officer, naively, I thought these kind of practices went out with the Match Girls strike. In 1888, women working at Bryant and May's Match Factory were working a 14-hour day for a pittance. They were being fined for crimes such as talking, dropping matches or daring to go to the toilet without permission. And they also suffered from cancer caused by yellow phosphorus, which was banned in the USA. The British government refused to ban it in case it caused a restraint to free trade. So the familiar rule of putting profit before people was alive and flourishing in 19th century Britain, just as it is now with blacklisting. I wrote an article over a decade ago for The Citizen, and in it I said, unlike our comrades of 2 centuries ago, at least we don't have to lose our liberty for fighting for socialism and decent conditions for the workers. Well, sadly, I was wrong to assume that things are so different now. Many trade unions, as we've heard, have been unable to secure work because of big business blacklists, resulting in poverty, family breakdown and mental ill health. And despite his earlier promises, unfortunately, Tony Blair, as Prime Minister, did not outlaw blacklisting. It was, of course, assumed that as the Economic League had gone, then blacklisting must have stopped, if only. We know now that the Consulting Association continued the disgraceful ruination of people's lives. And I'm pleased that Joanne Lamont has now signed up to a trade union anti-blacklisting agreement, because the firms who blacklisted trade unionists should suffer as ordinary workers have suffered. And I support the GMB Unite and UCAT's call that the firms should not be awarded contracts for public sector work until those damaged by their vile blacklisting are compensated. It's a scandal that even now big companies like Balfour Beatty, Skanska and McAlpine are gaining public contracts. They're being rewarded for their use of illegally held blacklisting information rather than being penalised for their shocking behaviour. So we should send a strong message today that we stand in solidarity with the trade unions and with all of those affected by this scandalous conduct, and stop those companies at the heart of it from being rewarded with lucrative public contracts. Presiding Officer, I know that Neil Findlay will not give up on this until the workers are compensated, until the companies are made to pay, and I once again congratulate him on leading this debate today and support his call for an inquiry.
Thank you very much. Now call on John Finney to be followed by John Pentland.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I also add my congratulations to Neil Findlay, not only for this motion, but for his ongoing work in relation to this and in other worker-related issues. Thanks are due too to the trade union movement, individual members and collectively the Hazard magazine, the Blacklisting Support Group and countless others. And indeed, thanks, as many people have said, due to the Scottish Affairs Committee for their interim report. And we do know there's evidence of financing and supporting this sinister list. I'm grateful to Unite for the briefing, and one phrase that I took out of it, and I quote, "human story of poverty, family breakdown and emotional despair, and, in the worst case, suicide." I think it's important to recall that this is individuals we're talking about here. I think the damage has been done. It perhaps can't be directly repaired, but it certainly can't be allowed to be repeated, and we must see this eradication of what, as many others have said, is an attack on human rights. Unite's General Secretary has described it as an ongoing problem, and certainly I'm dealing with an instance at the moment of corporate abuse of smaller businesses, which in turn affects workforces. So the bullying does continue. And what we've seen is the vindictiveness, the deceit, collusion, but as yet we haven't seen any justice. Now, some members have talked about attitudes, and I think the attitude that sees the United Kingdom's Prime Minister talk about slaying the health and safety monster, the attitude that sees equality impact assessments referred to as nonsense, is the very attitude that underpins a lot of this. Drew Smith referred to the erosion of safety in the workplace, the dearth of proactivity, no unannounced inspections, no follow-up inspections, the consequence of little investigation and even less prosecution. And the pernicious is a word that's used a lot, and I think the pernicious rights for shares issue that's ongoing at the moment. And I would ask whose interests are served by all of this. It's certainly not the workforce, and it's certainly not efficient. It's political dogma and invariably the blind pursuit of profit, which cannot be allowed to go unchecked. So I hope the Minister will address what plans the Scottish Government have to address this issue, and indeed whether it's moved on from the situation on the 31st of January this year, when I hope I quote the Enterprise Minister Fergus Ewing correctly, when he said, "I remind members that this is a parliament and not a court. It is not appropriate, in my view, to bandy about around allegations," that was about blacklisting, "without evidence." So I think we have a growing wealth of evidence, and I hope that that will be picked up by the Minister. Many people have talked about the procurement bill. There's opportunities there to address much more than the blacklisting, but that's certainly one. Now, I didn't know whether to commend the blacklisting of blacklisters, and I don't know if that's appropriate. There may be a place for it. Neil Findlay talked about owning up. Alec Johnson talked about reconciliation. Certainly, I think we need to shift the burden of proof. And I would favour no public money going to any company who disregards workers' health and safety, who disregard the important role of trade unions and staff associations. And I think that can be a start connected with the procurement bill. I support Neil Findlay's calls for an independent public inquiry. I think there is a debate to be had about the status, powers and issues of compensation around that. But we must ensure that the corporate cowboys are reined in. I like the challenge thrown to this Parliament by the trade unions, and I think everyone who genuinely supports social justice and a positive future for Scotland must also add their voices of support to the call for an inquiry. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now call on John Pentland, after which we'll move to the closing speech from the Minister.
Presiding Officer, can I also declare an interest as a member of Community Union? I'd like to thank Neil Findlay for bringing forward this debate to the Scottish Parliament and for campaigning work he has been doing on this issue. This is an issue that has significant common ground with my own member debate last week on International Workers' Memorial Day, when we remembered all those who had lost their lives or suffered injury and ill health because of poor health and safety in the workplace. It was highlighted then that many of the people who were on the blacklist were put there because they dared to question unsafe practices that threatened the lives and well-being of workers. Now, between our debates, we also had the May Day International Workers' Day, when we celebrate the strength of the labour movement. So we have good cause then to look at the victimisation of those who raise concerns about safety, and to highlight the links between poor health and safety and the lack of unionisation in the workplace. Good cause, too, to talk about people who have lost their jobs and their livelihoods because they tried to do something about it. And good cause to look at what we can do, what policies can we adopt, and what action can we take to make sure that such victimisation will not be tolerated by a society that cares about the safety and well-being of its workers. Now, many of the people who are on the blacklist were employed, or more accurately, denied employment in the construction industry. You know, an industry that has one of the worst health and safety records outside agriculture, an industry like agriculture, notoriously anti-union, where people have been sacked and even charged with conspiracy for attempting to organise. The list of subscribers to the Consulting Association reads like a who's who of the construction industry, and as Neil Findlay has already alluded to, some are no longer members, but that damage has been done. Now, we all know that people who challenge unsafe practices and who organise a workforce to fight against dangerous working conditions should be heroes, but the big construction companies try to make them zeros by operating a blacklist. So what can we do to protect them and encourage good practice? The Information Commissioner may have busted the Consulting Association, but in the ICO's words, compiling and operating an intelligence database, even where this is done covertly, does not automatically breach the Data Protection Act. So anyone who is determined enough can still operate. Now, the way forward has already been raised, so let's start with central and local government dealings with construction companies. Should we be giving contracts to those who have poor health and safety records and who victimise trade unionists? And it has been suggested maybe that's something we can add to our ethical criteria of procurement. And since bad health and safety has consequences for society, putting a burden on health and other services, then that's an economic criterion too. And as Ros Foya from Unite and the Blacklist Support Group said just over an hour ago, no more rhetoric, no more hypocrisy. Let's send a clear message to the employers that we will not support such victimisation, and let's have that public inquiry.
Thank you very much. I now call on Angela Constance, Minister, up to 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Presiding Officer, can I also add to the commendations by other members of this Parliament to Neil Findlay for securing the debate. It's been a well-attended debate and a well-supported debate. For the record, Presiding Officer, I would like to restate the position of the Scottish Government, which is quite simply that blacklisting is wholly unacceptable. And the Scottish Government endorses the comments made by the Health and Safety Executive and condemns any form of blacklisting of employees by employers for raising concerns about safety standards at work. And the Scottish Government is totally opposed to blacklisting or the compiling of a blacklist on such a basis. Now, Presiding Officer, if I can firstly address the issue that has been most prominent in the contributions raised by Neil Findlay and others, is that as a government we acknowledge the call for a Scottish Government inquiry. However, we believe it is appropriate for the Scottish Affairs Committee to conduct
and conclude their inquiry into this issue. As we all know, matters of employment law are reserved to the UK Government, and the Scottish Government is not convinced at this time of the merits of another inquiry whilst the Scottish Affairs Committee investigation is ongoing and that their recommendations are pending. Certainly.
Sean Finney.
Thank you, President Officer. I'm grateful to the Minister for accepting an intervention. Would the Minister accept that human rights is a devolved issue?
Mr Andrew Constance.
Absolutely, and I think as members of the Scottish Parliament we are all very aware of the high calibre set for the Scottish Government and the Scottish Parliament in terms of complying with EHCR, but the fact remains that employment and industrial relations remains reserved to the UK Government, and that may remain an anomaly of the constitutional settlement in my view, but it is the factual position. Can you just let me a wee bit of progress and then I'll let you in. We are pleased to see the rigour that's been applied by the Scottish Affairs Committee to its investigation, and as a Government we have read the Committee's interim report with great interest. And in its interim report the Committee concludes that the service offered by the Consulting Association was a blacklisting one, that its subscribers put money into and took information out of a database, and that this information was used to make decisions about whether or not to employ certain individuals. And we concur with the Scottish Affairs Committee in concluding that this practice was unethical and is to be condemned. And I'm happy to give way to Mr Finlay.
Neil Finlay.
Thanks very much to the Minister. Just to confirm, justice is devolved as well, but just to be absolutely clear, because this is an interim report, the Scottish Government sees there being no merit in having an inquiry now, but that position will be reconsidered once the full report is published. First question. And secondly, I wonder if the Minister would address the point I raised in the debate about what steps are being taken now on major construction projects like the Forth Road Bridge to ensure that no blacklisting is still going on.
Minister.
I will get to the point that Mr Finlay makes about what action can take place now, because there have been significant regulatory changes since 2009. Let me just, on Mr Finlay's first point, reassure him that as a Government we are looking forward to the Scottish Affairs Committee's final report, and we'll look at that report very carefully, and I just want to reassure him on that point. It would be inappropriate for me to pre-empt any of the conclusions or recommendations that is currently taking place in what's quite a weighty and very serious investigation being undertaken by the Scottish Affairs Committee. I also note from the Committee's interim report that it intends to continue its investigation in four main areas: whether companies that have been involved in blacklisting should be prevented from tendering for public sector contracts in the future, or if they should only be allowed to tender if they pay compensation to those who have been blacklisted. Another issue which is very important is the Scottish Affairs Committee continues to seek evidence whether blacklisting is still taking place, both within the construction industry and more widely, and especially in Scotland. Other issues, very important, whether compensation should be paid to whom and who should provide the compensation, and whether the existing legislation against blacklisting is sufficient if properly enforced, or whether changes in the law are necessary to eradicate the practice. Now, let me touch upon Mr Finlay's second point to his last intervention. As we all know, the legislative framework at the time meant that blacklisting was not illegal. However, as we've heard from Elaine Smith, the Employment Relations Act 99 Blacklist Regulations 2010 were introduced by the UK Government in 2010 and prohibit blacklisting. So I believe that we are starting from a better position.
There is also the 2012 Public Contracts Scotland regulations, and these regulations provide the rights for contracts not to be awarded to companies who have been involved in grave misdemeanours. Now, we've heard that a number of companies that have been awarded contracts by the Scottish Government and its agencies since 2007 have been named by the Information Commissioner's Office as companies which subscribed to the Consulting Association. However, we have no evidence to suggest that any of these companies engaged in blacklisting in connection with the performance of any contracts awarded by the Scottish Government of its ages. And I'm sure members will appreciate the need for evidence and rigour, although it has to be... yes.
I'm very grateful to the Minister for giving way, but doesn't that underline the point of why we need a public inquiry to raise that evidence, and that the agencies that exist in Scotland which are giving these contracts are the best placed people to be able to tell us the contracts that they're giving, what is going on in those contracts, and we could do that all in public, and we could involve a whole range of agencies in Scotland, including the police, where there have been suggestions about where some of the information that was passed to the Consulting Association came from.
Thank you, Minister. Would you like to close, please?
I understand the point that Mr Smith makes, and there is no doubts in my mind that there are many people that have been adversely affected by blacklisting. But I hope that he will understand the point I make and accept it in the spirit that it is made, that it is appropriate for the Scottish Advisory Committee, who is continuing its investigation, seeking further evidence, and as a government we will look very seriously and closely at the final report when it comes away. And if I could move on, Presiding Officer, in a little time that I do have left, to talk about the action that we can do now and in the future. As a government, we have invited the unions STUC, Unite, Unison, GMB to work with us on the development and strengthening of guidance for public bodies on addressing the issue of blacklisting, both in terms of the procurement processes and in public contracts. And we intend to circulate an initial draft of this guidance to the unions shortly, and to convene a meeting to get their input and to get their very valuable dialogue. And we want to explore with the trade union movement the potential for asking additional questions of suppliers at the selection stage of a procurement exercise, and also holding suppliers to account through revised terms and conditions of contract, including issues such as termination clauses for those who breach relevant legislation. We are, as members have noted, considering carefully what measures can be included in the forthcoming procurement reform bill to deal with inappropriate conduct, including blacklisting by companies that are bidding for public contracts in Scotland. And if I can just end with the words of the Deputy First Minister in a very recent debate in Parliament. She very clearly stated that she wanted procurement in Scotland to be a force for good in terms of sustainable economic growth, supporting our communities, but also in terms of supporting and cementing ethical practice. And I'm very sure, Presiding Officer, given the tone and tenor of this debate, that we can indeed move forward as a Parliament with very due diligence and vigilance to ensure that blacklisting is indeed consigned to the history books.
Excellent. Many thanks. And I now suspend this meeting until 2:30. Thank you all.